Back with Rich Klein, we're going to talk about 1958 Topps baseball. I actually collected 1958 Topps football when they came out, bought them in packs. But 58 baseball, I was more of a baseball guy for sure, as were almost everybody in those days. So it's a great set. Thanks sponsors, Topps, Panini, Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Huggins and Scott Auctions, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards, ComC.com, and Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication. It's not my favorite design from the 50s for sure.
To me, just an inch above 59 Topps. The funny thing is, when Topps did that as a heritage set, I really liked it. Doing the more modern photography and the more modern design, I think they did a great job in 2007 with the 58 Topps heritage set, so to speak. I thought they did a better job than Topps did in 58.
It's a minimalist design, and frankly, the modern tools of graphic design made it a lot easier 50 years later than in 58. A lot of that was done in the traditional.
It's also a goofy set, and that the cards get easier as the set goes up. The first series is by far the toughest series, and it's not super tough. It's not like 57 scarce series or even 59 or 60 high numbers. There are plenty of them out there in 58 first series. But 58, the first series also has the white and the yellow variations, including some of our best players.
Not only that, the biggest problem for first series is the condition sensitivity.
Those cards were played with the most.
Because they were played with the most. And by the time you got to the last series, there's hardly any good players in there, except for the major innovation of bringing in I think they were Sporting News All-Stars at that point, but with the blue stars and the red stars for the American League, our neighborhood freaked out. And more about Stan Musial, because I lived in the Pittsburgh area, Stan Musial, who was a native Western Pennsylvania guy, than even Mickey Mantle, because Stan had been not in cards for a bunch of years.
You had Musial, and then you had, as you said, all the hot players. And 58 has rookies that have improved since we first started. Orlando Cepeda is now a Hall of Famer. Curt Flood's a pretty high card. I personally think Curt Flood will be a Hall of Famer someday.
He's a Hall of Fame footnote.
Yeah,
He was a good enough player that he could come in on being a player, not just a contributor.
To me, and I think that's something where the Baseball Hall of Fame doesn't have a contributor section. Somebody like Lefty O'Doul, who was a good player, was borderline to some people as a Hall of Famer. His career wasn't quite long enough, but also basically brought baseball to Japan, was big on the Pacific Coast. He could be a Hall of Famer as a contributor. Buck O'Neil should have been in as a contributor. There's a lot of people out there who could be in as contributors that you don't have to put them all in immediately, but you can do as they've done in football and in basketball and in hockey. You get them in on that way because they did serve. It's even a way to get some of the famous pitching and hitting coaches. Frank Crosetti, who has more World Series rings than anybody, that's a contributor. Yeah. But so you've got a Curt Flood, you've got Cepeda, you've got Maris, you've got a lot of people. Sometimes you have one-off rookies too. And you've got these really quirks where there are those four cards, 443, 446, 450, and 462, that are slightly shorter printed so they could double and triple print some of the All-Star cards.
Can you imagine if one of those four short prints had been not just a name player, but a star or a superstar? Because those aren't hard to get, I think partly because they're not well-known players. They are tougher, but there's no extra demand other than the complete set collectors. But if Maris had been one of those four pulled, or Flood, or Cepeda, yeah, any name player. Because in our neighborhood, people wanted complete sets, but they were gaga over Mantle and Musial and the other Sporting News All-Stars.
Ted Williams was in there too.
Kids, and I lived in more than one neighborhood, but they somehow had some sense of the current players, and I think a greater sense of history than the kids do now.
Brian Gray always talks about you've got to have video of the players. When we were growing up, there wasn't video. We learned about all the players by reading about them. Everything was black and white and printed. Now you learn by watching YouTube videos. You watch games on TV or the highlights on TV or the highlights on TikTok or the highlights on Instagram. It's a visual thing. When we were growing up, learning was a reading thing. So we as kids grew up with more respect for what came before than we do now. And that's just a fact. That's not denigrating anybody today. And I think that's hard for people who, when they look at 58s, don't understand that the average common player was really good. The sets were basically everybody in a major league uniform. In those days, they called it the 400. You have to be among the 400 best baseball players in the country to be in that set. And they had some combo cards,
Team cards, different backs,
checklist.
alphabetical as well as numerical. Okay.
If it's the numeric checklist, they're better on the card backs than they are the alphabeticals for those four that have that. Plus, it's like the last gasp of Brooklyn Dodgers and New York Giants. I don't think any of the uniforms actually say Brooklyn Dodgers and New York Giants, but it took a while for Topps to actually finish that. I think they do use 57 New York Giants on the team card because that's where they were. There's a lot of really cool things in 58. 58 was a great example. There are like 30 cards where I'll call it a living set, where they put notes like so-and-so was traded, or so-and-so was sent to the minors, or so-and-so's now with St. Paul. And so they were keeping up with the sets as they were producing them, which is cool. Doing what they call a master set nowadays. Plus, some of the star players will obviously cost you real money, even in the variations. But there's a challenge of just doing a master set and getting all the variations. I rarely see the Bobby Richardson or the Gil McDougall variations, period. I'm not talking about just because I grew up in New York where they were very popular. I just don't see those cards very often as the variations. And there's some of the yellow team cards you do see quite a few of.
However, in 58, I'm wondering if a large portion of the distribution of 58 Topps cards was not just east of the Mississippi, but in the Northeast.
Oh, that was true for so long. The megalopolis is why when you go to card shows in the megalopolis, that's why, to me, vintage is like a piece of cake, because that's what we grew up seeing because there was so much of it up there. Texas, there was not as much vintage. It had to meander its way down here.
You had to move with your cards.
You had to move.
In large part. I'm trying to be opinionated here. I think 58 is not nearly as good a set as 57.
Oh, the design
very strong preference for 57 over 58.
57 is one of my favorite sets of these, what they call standard card size. 58 is such a letdown compared to 57. As I said, it grew on me with the heritage, but I did complete the set and all the variations.
Okay, but 58's better than 59.
Oh, yeah. 59, the photos are too small. At least 58
better than 60, I think.
I like 60, even though it's horizontal.
Yeah. And then 61 I started liking again.
Yeah, 61's a good set. And my brother gave me his 62 high numbers, so I always liked the 62s. 64 is a weird set because it has a lot of great quirks. And I think that's the thing. 58's a great set, but it's also boring at the same time. It's the weirdest.
Is it anybody's favorite set?
I'm sure some kid started collecting 58 Topps and said, that's my favorite set. There's always somebody that loves the 58 set. But it's not going to get a lot of votes in your favorite set world. They win against 59.
It's going to win any contest.
Yeah. Well, the backs are well written. Yeah. There's the comics. So there's a lot of good things in 58. And as I said, it slides where it gets easier as the set goes on. There's also less star players as the set goes on.
What you're saying, yeah, the master set collector would have a challenge, but just the basic set collector, it would not be as big a challenge. Although if you're looking at having them graded and be above a certain grade level, those all-stars are, the card stock is not so great. The first series shows where seemingly always when I get them, but just trying to put together a high grade set throughout, I think would be difficult.
The first series is especially difficult in high grade. And I don't think I ever saw finds of 58 first series cards. I had plenty of nice condition cards of the last two series. I didn't have nearly as many of the first four series. The condition gets better as you get higher up in that year too, which again is counter to almost every other Topps set.
Why is that? They weren't scrimping on production materials, I don't think. Was it quality control? I thought it was handling.
It is handling for low numbers, but it strikes me as weird because usually you get less of the last series. They made more of the last series, I think, because, as we've pointed out, of all the Hall of Famers in the All-Star set, it was the first Stan Musial card, a major card, since 53 Bowman.
Yeah.
And then there's no Stan Musial card other than some regionals until 58. As you said, he was such a big figure, especially where you were in 58, near Donora, Pennsylvania.
58, if I look back at it, it's just a situation that may be the last series of a set that Topps sold out. They may have been still burned by the 52 Topps high number fiasco of overprinting, and whether they barged them in the Hudson River or whatever. They clearly printed, they're scarce, but they didn't sell out. Okay.
Yeah.
In 58, I bet they sold out. And it's even possible that they reordered because of those Sporting News All-Stars.
I bet you're right.
And that would have been the only time that Topps would have gone back to press, perhaps. And Cy Berger, who I think was brilliant in many ways, I don't know how he had his finger on the pulse of the hobby when maybe he said it was a kid's hobby, but he knew it was a little bit more than that. Or maybe it was mainly kids, and he just had a sense that kids are really going to like this.
Remember, kids knew, and I always talk about the 80s. 1985, my friends Hank Davis and Hans Jubelt, they had a nice, truly neighborhood store in Garfield, New Jersey called H&H Hobbies. And people would buy the 88 Topps packs. And they wouldn't keep McGuire, actually, all the time. They kept Mattingly, they kept Gooden, they kept Eric Davis, they kept the hot rookies. And if there wasn't somebody they really liked, they put the cards on the counter. And I think it was true in 85, so I bet you it was true in 58, since we can reverse those 2 years. Kids instinctively knew who the best players were. And because they knew from reading the box scores, and they knew from reading the Sunday figures in the papers, who's leading the league in batting, who's leading in home runs, who's leading in RBIs. Oh, Stan Musial, we just know Stan Musial. My parents have been talking about Stan Musial. Oh, we know Ted Williams. Oh, I see Mickey Mantle every year in the World Series. I know about Mickey Mantle. Oh, I want these cards. And I think Berger understood that the names were the keys. And it's the same way in 58, it's the same way in 85, and it's the same thing in 2025.
Reading box scores at the age of 10 or 11, we weren't the only ones doing that, because in the 50s, you got in the habit of reading the box scores that were there, and kids did that. And in school, they knew who had 3 hits the night before, or actually the day before in many cases.
This was a good culture shock when I moved to Dallas. Because in New Jersey, we didn't always get the box scores, especially on Friday night games. A lot of times I wouldn't see the box scores till Sunday.
Yeah.
The Dallas Morning News, most of the time, had all the box scores of the games in the morning paper. It was such a change where I knew I could get the full box scores the next morning. I didn't have to worry about waiting 2 days for the boxes anymore.
Dallas Morning News had a very well-respected sports department that was beefed up, I think, mainly for high school football and stuff like that. But they had a double sports section.
Oh, they were huge. In fact, speaking of culture shock in the
Well,
morning,
they made it a priority.
One of the greatest culture shocks I ever got, I could walk to a convenience store from my apartment. So the first Saturday morning I'm in town, I walk to a convenience store. I get the Saturday paper because I'm not doing anything really that day. And the football scores of the major high school games are on top of the first page of the sports section. The Bergen Record, which was a wonderful paper and had a great sports section at the time. The high school sports were beginning on page 17 of the sports section. In Texas, the key scores were right on the front page, and the key stories were right on the front page for football. That was such a different world for me.
And they were read.
All right. I love the 58 talk. And there are some cool challenges, some cool cards, plenty of good Hall of Famers, some rookies, some variations. It's not the most aesthetically pleasing set, but if you want a fun set that doesn't kill you in terms of, hey, I just want to do the base set, it's not the worst set in the world to go after.
It shouldn't be criticism that the best card in the set is not a rookie. It's card 150.
Yeah, the Mantle for sure.
Mantle, you'd rather have the Mantle than even the Maris, although that may be a closer call there.
I think it's closer now than it used to be, but I don't think it's a close call.
I think Maris is a Hall of Famer to me. Historical significance, 2 MVPs.
He's borderline to me, but especially for people who grew up when you grew up, he's a Hall of Famer. He was also a great defensive outfielder. He had an impact on the game. Again, this is where you can use the word contributor. He played in 7 World Series in 9 years in the 60s. He's done 60 to 64 and then 67 and 68. And final card insight, there's a small inset photo, including Mr. Maris on a 69 Topps World Series card. He is greeting, I believe, Tim McCarver like in Game 4.
Okay.
So if you want to really get Maris from beginning to the end, you can get a career capper card of Roger Maris. It won't have the stats, but it's like the 74 Willie Mays World Series card. You can get a final Maris card in 69 Topps. The man in the